If you know anything about Zimbabwe, you probably consider it a what not to do guide on how to run a country, given they went from printing 5 Zimbabwe dollar notes in 2007 to 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars per note in 2008. But it wasn't always like that, and Zimbabwean history is probably one of the most fascinating on earth, being that it was the only country during British decolonisation whose leaders decided to say no, and instead declare their own independence as Rhodesia, the only other country to do that from the British Empire being the United States. So, I wanted to go and see what remains of that history.
그때처럼 우리가 살고 있는가? 그때처럼 우리가 살고 있는가? 내 젊은 시절 추억도 많은 사진첩을 펼칠 때면 전하의 그날 옛 선우들이 나를 보고 물어보네. 그때처럼 우리가 살고 있는가? 그때처럼 우리가 살고 있는가? 굳게 다진 그 맹세 심장으로 지키던 그때 그날처럼
Understanding Zimbabwe requires understanding the ethnic makeup of the country, which the largest group, the majority being Shonas, who are descendants of migrants from the Bantu migration from the north to the south of Africa, and the minority group being the Matabele, or Nibilis, and they come as migrants from the south of the country. They were led here by a once great king called Mzilikazi, who was a lieutenant under Shaka Zulu of the Zulu warriors. And then the third group are the Rhodesians, who are the descendants of the pioneers sent here to found Rhodesia, and the later British immigration from all over the years that Rhodesia existed. That's a simplified version, but trust me, this needs simplifying, because the observant among you may have noticed that if all these people are migrants, where the hell are the natives? And for them, we have to look to the Khoisan, or San people. Now, the San people were true hunter-gatherers. A San man would need a spear, a knife, and that was about it. He was pretty happy with that, until just about everyone else turned up and bullied them off their land, to the point that only 1,000 of them remain in Zimbabwe, and the rest were pushed out to Botswana on the desert. And the British eventually came along and insisted that the San people join the agricultural revolution, to which the San people still pretty much reject it and carry on being hunter-gatherers. Absolute chads. So why did I tell you all that? Because it's going to come in handy, trust me. Because the history of Zimbabwe for the British doesn't begin in Zimbabwe, but instead with one man and his dream to build a railway from Cape Town all across Africa to Cairo, and that man being Cecil Rhodes. This was a huge obsession of Rhodes. He even had his own flag symbolising the railway, and all that was standing in the way of him was annexing the territory between the two and developing the land. Because the British had already conquered South Africa, we stole it off the Dutch. These people became known as the Boers because the Dutch word for farmer is boer, and these people didn't want to live under British rule, and couldn't go back to the Netherlands because they called Africa their home now, so took on the moniker Afrikaners. And the Afrikaners decided to go on a great trek north to found their own Afrikaner states to live away from British rule. In fact, they managed to run into King Mzilikazi as he was migrating north as well. And eventually the British decided they would engage in the Boer Wars and conquer the Afrikaners once again and take their territory, which now took the British up to the Limpopo River, the most southern point of Zimbabwe. Rhodes needed the territory to settle his railway, so decided to make contact with the new king of the Matabele, who was no longer Mzilikazi, but Lobengula. The Matabeles being a warrior people, they basically controlled all of Zimbabwe, and so Rhodes sent some men to him to discuss mining rights, and Lobengula agreed to give exclusive mining rights to the British in return for money and Henry Martini rifles. This gave Rhodes what he needed to set up a chartered company, being the British South Africa Company. Basically think of the East India Company, but African. What's funny though is that both of those, they're still on Companies House, which is a British website which tells you whether or not a company is still active, and both of them are. The East India Company is run by an Indian. But Rhodes decided to send a pioneer column north to start settling the land of Zimbabwe to become Rhodesia, and he sent with them an armed guard of his own police force from the company, known as the British South Africa Police Force, BSAP, and they founded the capital of this land on Fort Salisbury. And after they rose the British flag, everything looked well, except that King Lobengula didn't really agree to the terms. He said he couldn't read them, and once he found out what was in them, he was pretty angry. So the first Matabele War broke out. The BSAP had 750 men, and 1,000 African allies. King Lobengula and the Matabele warriors had 100,000 men, 20,000 of them armed with Henry Martini rifles. So naturally, the Matabele got wiped out by the British, because we had the Maxim gun and they did not. Which is a bit silly, because the Matabele really should have won that one, with all of those rifles, but they didn't really know how to use them. Which kind of reminds me of a funny story I've heard from an African civil war, I can't remember which one, in which they captured some prisoners from the other side and wondered why they hadn't lost a single man but had wiped out the enemy. It turns out they got AKs and then got the sights and turned the sights to maximum, thinking that would make the gun shoot harder. Naturally, it didn't work, and so they just didn't tell them. Let them keep missing. Either way, the British decided to march on the Ndebele capital of Bulawayo and burn it to the ground. 34 men under Alan Wilson were sent to track down the king and get him to surrender in a peace deal. However, when they crossed the river to hunt him down, they ran into 3,000 Ndebele warriors, and they fought until the last man was killed, which was a hell of a sacrifice, and they also achieved a 14-to-1 KD ratio, so they became international heroes of the British. Pretty soon after, the king got smallpox and died, so the war was ended. This didn't really last, and pretty soon the Second Matabele War broke out, because a Matabele spiritual leader was, spreading rumours that the British were causing the droughts and locusts that were plaguing the country at that time, and the Shona and Matabele both rose up. Now this went about as wacky as you could expect, because the spiritual leader was promising things like the British bullets would turn to water, and the cannons would turn to eggs. And King Lobengula would just be reincarnated once they took Bulawayo, and ... profit. So it went about as well as you could expect. They turned up in Bulawayo and began massacring civilians. So a relief force was sent to secure Bulawayo, which included Scouting's Baden-Powell and Cecil Rhodes himself. The relief force arrived, secured the town, and then Baden-Powell ordered an American scout to go and hunt down the spiritual leader and assassinate him. They found him doing a dance of immunity in the sacred Matopos Hills, and shot him in the heart. At which point there was a lot of disunity amongst the Matabele army, and Cecil Rhodes decided that his next move was to just walk into the Matabele camp unarmed and just discuss peace, which worked somehow. After the war, Cecil Rhodes decided to build a house of his own in Bulawayo, and then in his will insisted to be buried on top of the Matopos Hills, along with Alan Wilson and the Shangani Patrol in a monument, so they could both look over the land they had settled. And what they had settled would soon be named after Rhodes' death to Rhodesia in honour of Cecil Rhodes. The Rhodesians went to serve in the First World War and Second World War, and even answered the call to send forces to put down communist guerrillas who were uprising in the Malay Emergency in Malaysia. However, after the Second World War, the British Empire was being collapsed, and it was an insistence that every African nation be given its independence under the principle of black majority rule, meaning that it would end up with black leaders and a black party running the country. And the Rhodesians said no. Every nation to the north of them had been overtaken by some uniquely insane black African dictator, and so these people, who now made up about 5% of the population of Rhodesia, they didn't just live in this land, they'd settled it. That's what Rhodes' mission was about, and these people wanted to maintain the country they had built and the traditions it had, especially considering that Rhodesia at this point had one of the best quality of life of any African nation, and never mind being the breadbasket of Africa. So this became a bit of a problem for the British. The Rhodesian solution to this was to declare a unilateral Declaration of Independence, UDI, which the only other country to do so in the entire history of the British Empire was the United States. And the new leader would be Ian Smith, a man who was born and raised in Africa, meaning that he was the first independent white African leader. This was a huge embarrassment to the UK and the West, who were demanding black majority rule, and the other side of the world was the communist world, the Soviet Union and China. Yeah, those guys just started backing communist black guerrillas, such as ZANU and ZAPU. ZANU being Robert Mugabe and his boys, the Shonas, and ZAPU being Joshua and Nkomo and the Matabeles. The Rhodesians were declared rebels, and Rhodesia declared a threatening rogue state. Which is kind of hilarious when you think about it. I mean, this country had a tiny army. It wasn't a physical threat to really any of its neighbours in terms of actually invading them. Never mind the world's global superpowers. But it was a moral threat. For the Rhodesians, the idea was that the white minority would continue to run the country until there were enough educated blacks that they could effectively take over the systems of government. And the idea of whites running a country, because the locals were still stuck in effectively the Stone Age on the tech tree, in all of their lifetime that had been considered the right thing to do, and all of a sudden it was no longer considered the right thing to do. So for them, you can understand why they were a bit confused. Everyone expected this to utterly collapse, but somehow it survived for the next 14 years as an independent nation known as Rhodesia, but with the only friends it could garner being other considered rogue states like Israel and South Africa. And the white population of Rhodesia faced conscription, which the people they were fighting were black, but weirdly enough, they would call them gooks. The reason for that being apparently because they were trained by the Chinese. Still strange, I'll be honest. The killing blow was made by the American government providing so much pressure on the South Africans to stop allowing the supply of oil to the Rhodesian government, at which point it collapsed and was handed back over to the British for 1 year to function as a colony so elections could be organised. And the communist-backed Robert Mugabe won those elections and renamed Salisbury to Harare. But now there was a bit of political tension between the Nobiles and the Shonas, because Robert Mugabe and ZANU, well, they represented the Shonas and ZAPU represented the Matabeles. The logical solution to this from Robert Mugabe was apparently genocide. So the Zimbabwean 5th Brigade, who were trained by North Korean military advisors, set up concentration camps. Items on the menu included re-education, torture, killing over 20,000 people, and never mind the various sexual crimes and rapes, which also function as a way of genociding people. And they make for very grim reading. The aftermath being that Joshua and Nkomo would agree that ZANU and ZAPU would form together under a unified banner of ZANU PF, Patriotic Front. But what about the Rhodesians? Well, they peaked in 1975 at about 300,000, and by 2002, 85% of them had left the country, the remainder making up 0.4% of the population of Zimbabwe, which the only reason they remained is because they were highly productive farmers, and therefore had a reason to remain. But they owned a disproportionate amount of farmland in the country compared to the black population, so it was decided that they should be forced off their land and the land given to war veterans who were not farmers. This did not cause the economy to boom, but, everything could be fine if nothing bad happened. And then 2008 happened. Zimbabwe went from a food exporter to a food importer, and with very little to export, and, well, no real credit because the world's financial system had completely collapsed, pretty soon the country ran into complete chaos, and you ended up having to draw in bread lines at, well over 100 trillion for a loaf of bread. Amazingly, Robert Mugabe managed to get 90% of the vote in the 2008 presidential elections. Good job. At which point, well, even though 95% of Rhodesians will have left the country by 2017, Ian Smith's Rhodesian government didn't look so bad to the black population. And in 2017, well, Zanu PF had had enough and decided to orchestrate a coup to get rid of Robert Mugabe. Since then, President Mnangagwa has taken over and has won 2 elections. So the question on my mind was, what does the country look like now? Which meant organising a route which started at Victoria Falls on the Zambezi River, and then going through the countryside and the 2 biggest cities in Zimbabwe, Bulawayo and Harare. So, first things first, get on a state-run airline with censored movies, fill in an immigration form that no one will ever read, and then arrive in Victoria Falls. Victoria Falls hasn't changed much, and I can say that for sure because Lord Miles came along for this one, and he brought along a 1948 guide to visiting this country, which, when we looked at the map, was pretty much exactly the same as the map to tell you where to go in the town. And this is because Victoria Falls is known for, well, the falls, which were discovered by a Scottish adventurer, David Livingstone, and named after Queen Victoria. Once you get off the plane, you're going to have to go and get supplies, so you should go to Zimbabwe's #1 supermarket, OK Mart, which isn't the best branding in the world, but they got some pretty stellar products, such as a long soap.
Imagine you're in the shower, you got some roommates, they're trying to see if you're actually, in the shower, they open up the door, and you're just like washing yourself like this. You can imagine how that looks, guys.
Well, it is the OK supermarket.
You know what? It's okay.
Turns out that stuff isn't just soap, by the way. Turns out you can use it to clean the floor or laundry detergent as well. I did hear someone say that you could use it as toothpaste, but I'm not sure I'd recommend it. Also, when you leave a store in Zimbabwe, you will need your receipt, because there are people who are going to check that receipt, and they look like people dressed in the military, but they're actually just private security. What's funny about these guys is the symbol of their company is actually the flag of Ancapistan. Not sure how to square that one. But these places were actually quite posh. If you wanted to go and see how Africans got their food, well, our guide did show us, and they're certainly far more vibrant. Now, they used to have the Zimbabwe dollar. Most people know that got hyperinflated, so now it's just a joke. And so they moved on to using, oh god, lordy, American money, which everyone uses for everything. Now, they did bring in a new currency called ZiG, which is Zimbabwe dollars backed by gold. And it seems that that's not really used. I mean, apparently it's used in the capital, not there yet. But out here in Victoria Falls, nobody fucking uses it, no point. In fact, we actually tried to get some at a bank, and the National Bank said they don't have the national currency. Yeah. So, you pay for everything with dollars. Now, you need small denominations because things have a small price here. And if you go to the supermarket, well, like I just did, you might buy, some Zimbabwean cookies for dinner, and they don't cost that much, like 30 pence. So you gotta pay for $1 for the item that's 30 cents, right? And so you might get 70 cents change. But the country's under embargo. They're not actually allowed to get American money. They have to get it through tourism and such. So they don't have any of the coins because there's no bloody point. It's not really worth it, but the notes are good enough for this. So what happens to your 70 cents change? We don't get it at all, because there's no coins, like I mentioned. So what happens? You get given sweets. Didn't want them. Doesn't matter. So what happens is that the person at the cashier's desk is like, oh, have some sweets, and that'll make up the few cents that's wrong. So then I got to the cashier and told her I don't want the sweets, you can keep the change. She responded with the answer, no. You have to have the sweets, I guess. So presumably whoever makes these goddamn crappy sweets is making a fortune off rounding errors. Right, some other weirdness. You may know that I usually travel with Freddo frogs, the little chocolate frogs. Basically, they're just nice, weird British gifts to give to people, right? Now in Zimbabwe, I guess they found out. They have their own Freddo frog, which it clearly just ripped off, I presume. I'll check the difference in ingredients and such later, but there we are. Theirs is worse, just saying. But I haven't tasted it, so maybe it's better. That... What the fuck? That's actually shaped like a frog, unlike a Freddo. So British Freddo is a cartoon frog. Zimbabwe Freddo is a frog. I'll let you guess which is better. I'm going to stick to handing out the British ones as gifts. If you are coming, bring small denominations, and if you don't like sweets, too bad, that's your change. I don't know if that basically makes the sweets some kind of currency, which, I mean, is actually better than the US dollar, because it's based on something, it's based on sweets. We did also check out an African's bar, which naturally has bars on the bar, but the cider was pretty damn good, not gonna lie. But with that, we started to make our way towards the falls, and as we got close, we ran across the old train station, which has been preserved just like it was, with no passenger trains running these days. Nearby, you will find an old steam train sitting there like a living museum. Choo-choo!
Choo-choo. Callum, the train's 50 years late, what's up, mate?
We're busy, alright? Fuck off. It still moves. Ah, there's still some coal. And someone is sleeping here. But one day, we were hanging around, and a proper living museum turned up as a steam engine, heading for Zambia, was at the station, and the crew invited me on their ancient machine to show it off. It still works!
Yeah, you see the fire.
Oh shit, it's hot. That's fucking brilliant.
Then you see the coal. This coal is come from one.
British,
Yes.
still safe.
Yeah. Only go as far as the border.
Right next to the railway is the Victoria Falls Hotel, and like all places in Zimbabwe that are open to the public, you will find a portrait of the new dear leader. This place was dumb expensive, so we decided just to pay for lunch so we could snoop around. Although lunch was a traditional Zimbabwean sadza with a roadrunner, which of course you can eat with your hands. I feel like a child.
Mentally we are.
I mean, it tastes pretty good, but I really don't want to eat with my hands. Especially with the best view on Earth, overlooking the bridge crossing the falls. And the place is full to the brim with old British stuff. There was even a sign showing the distance between the Cape and the Cairo from where you're sitting. So if you want to see British imperial ruins in perfect condition, this should definitely be on your list. But as we head down to the bridge, there's also some excellent game you can find just walking around the town, including the best game of all, American tourists, who will walk around a African town in full safari gear in a group. So they stand out quite a bit, you can't really miss them. Lovely people. Miles has beaten me to being the king of the rock. No.
Private island for sale, dirt cheap, good humidity, loads of upside potential, tourism works.
Okay, I'll call Jeff Epstein, the financier. There's also a statue of David Livingstone by the falls. But I also managed to find a man who made me a billionaire. And if you'd like to be a billionaire, well, please do subscribe on Subscribestar, and I will send you, well, one of these notes, which will definitely make you a millionaire, if not a billionaire. And the reason I'm asking is because that's how I fund these things. So if you'd like to help out, that's the way to do it, and you get something in return. But for those people who also want to throw more money at me to do these things, I have brought back things to sell, such as these Rhodesian car flags, which I found, which apparently were meant for an old government car. I think they might be the last ones in the country, and, well, I took them. And also this Zimbabwe Independence Medal, which I found, well, covered in dirt in Zimbabwe, and I've been polishing the bugger out of it. So now it looks pretty nice. And plenty of other stuff, which I'll mention as we go along. But none of this compares to Victoria Falls' true #1 tourist attraction, the Big Tree. It's a tree, and it's big. There's literally nothing special about the Big Tree either. There's plenty of other trees of the exact same type that are just as big, but this one on Google Maps is called the Big Tree. Because it's big. It's a tree. But with that, it was time to head to Bulawayo, and I thought, well, it's only 250 miles. Most people fly it, apparently, but I thought, why not drive? And then we can get a sense of the countryside and how people really live. This was a mistake. So we decided to fill up, which in Zimbabwe means someone else fills up for you. But the price is $6 a gallon for gas, which, to put it into perspective, the average monthly wage in Zimbabwe is $600. So that's like having $65 a gallon gas in the United States for the average American, which is incredibly expensive. It's time to say goodbye to the dear leader and his big posters, sit back and relax, and enjoy whatever crap Miles had on his phone.
I know damn well you can label jacking off a sport. Think about it. What the fuck athletically are you really doing in golf, my nigga? The goddamn golf club.
So we've been on this road for like 5 hours now, and there's still another 2.5 hours to go just to drive to the city from Victoria Falls. And it's not because it's a long-ass drive in terms of what it should be. It's because of all the potholes, the endless potholes, the endless goats in the middle of the road, cows, etc. At least the goats are cute. But the worst part is, it's a toll road. We paid a toll to go on a paved road, which is full of potholes, and the way they fix the potholes is by filling them with dirt. So we're riding on a part dirt, part paved road. So it takes 7 hours. 7.5 hours. Anyway, time to get back on the road.
Train.
You know I got the audio for this. It's just us being retarded. Look, even the train is voting for the dear leader. Ended up being a 9-hour drive, which at least did give me time to get my own back and show Miles my music. Arriving in Bulawayo, the first thing you notice is Rhodesian ruins in the form of old shops before passing by the Joshua and Como statue. There used to be a statue of Cecil Rhodes here, but it was replaced with a North Korean made one, which is a bit awkward, because, you know, the North Korean-backed 5th Brigade massacred the Matabeles, which are Joshua and Como's people. But hey-ho, I mean, they're over that. It was time to give the driver a Freddo and head to sleep, and we decided on the Bulawayo Club, which is one of the oldest buildings in Bulawayo, and used to not accept blacks or women. The locals have kept it in perfect condition, and it shows, complete with a bar with strict dress code, and every royal flush framed on the wall that ever happened in a poker game here. A large snooker room, complete with books going back to the 60s.
Set.
Portraits of both Queen Victoria and Queen Elizabeth II, who visited Rhodesia in 1947, along with memorials to Nabili warriors, club members who gave their lives in the First World War, and just a treasure trove of absolutely beautiful things from history.
It's got the tea.
One thing I have managed to find is a secret entrance into the back entrance here. Now, you'll notice There's a ladies' toilet. Which, actually, I'm going to go to bugger. So the ladies' toilet is very modern and posh and you know, normal, I guess. This is a toilet room. You know, you sit in the toilet and after shitting. But there didn't used to be a ladies' toilet. In fact, if you go around this back entrance, you'll see a men's toilet. And the men's toilet's doubly funny because I don't know if you can see it. The men's toilet comes with a ashtray because this is a gentleman's club for men, and women were not allowed to come in until very recently. So there was only one toilet. Didn't need another one. Sometimes hot water does work, sometimes it doesn't. Such is life. Got this story. Why does the government lie? Hey, look, our Central Intelligence Agency is corrupt. But that night we decided to dine on KFC because McDonald's is not in the country. The KFC is also very cheap for tourists, even with the 2% tourism tax, and it also comes with brown dunked chicken. But don't worry, we did dine on more traditional foods later in the staying there, such as fish and chips in a landlocked country, which was unbelievably good. But I wanted to find out what happened to that statue of Cecil Rhodes, and it turns out they didn't destroy it, they moved it to the Natural History Museum. Outside the museum you will find some ancient British machines. Bro just puts a lock on there. Yeah, I mean it'll work. If it works, it works. Inside you will find everything from the story of the pioneers, their Maxim gun, and the Nambili warriors. And then for some reason, a comparison between scientific medicine of the Europeans versus the African medicine of witchcraft. But in the garden, you will find Rhodes. He once stood on the high street, staring at the city he saved. He now overlooks the ruins of a once nice public park. The place is littered with a couple more ancient British machines, but most interestingly, here once was a miniature railway. These days, it's just so neglected, it's beyond recognition or restoration. Now, real ruins might belong in a museum, but the thing about Bulawayo is that the whole city is a collection of ruins from the British and Rhodesian era. Walking around, you will quickly find plenty of historic buildings. Their beautiful tops, compared to the shops below, covered in bars, stick out like a sore thumb. Some even have the distance to Cairo painted on them. Never mind the murals you can find that are obviously English in origin, including one of the City Hall, which I had to ask permission to film, of Cecil Rhodes negotiating peace with the Matobiles in their camp, unarmed. There was clearly another monument here, but it had been removed. All that remained were these battle axes with the year Rhodesia was founded. But there were two Rhodesian ruins I definitely wanted to hunt down. First being Ascot Racecourse, which once upon a time was well maintained as any First World racecourse, but now just sits in ruins. And here we are, this is Ascot. Oh, that's the odds. They used to be up. Let's go have a look what the last odds were. So in the Google Maps images, this was still up, so someone has broken this recently. Says information. Oh, Matabele Land Turf Club, horse number, jockey, draw, horse number, jockey, draw, and it's all gone. Overweights and allowances. The other side. Okay, it really is like being in Fallout, I fucking swear. I mean, I hate to be that guy who's just like, oh my god, it's just like Fallout, but it is. Here's the track. Look at it. I don't know why the camera's picking it up, but you can see where people used to sit. This is presumably the finishing line. Yippee. You know what's annoying is I have tried in my mental state to be completely positive and be like, I know the history, I know everyone thinks, but there is a modern Zimbabwe, there must be, you know. There must be on the up in some regard, you know. It might not be turning back to what it was, but it'll be advancing. And everyone we've spoken to is like, no, literally everything has gotten worse since the 80s. Never has gotten better, nothing. The only thing they can show for it is that now in the Bulawayo club, for example, blacks are now allowed in, and so are women. They used to be banned. Ugh. Not sure how safe this is. And there's a homeless guy living up here. That's the race course. Like, there's something beautiful in the fact that like the artistry was maintained. But that artistry again is like, there's something that just peaked in the 40s, 50s, I guess, in terms of aesthetics. I found the dividends. There is actually some numbers. See, the thing is, I don't actually know how to bet, so I don't know what the hell I'm looking at. But, you know, once upon a time, this was a thing, and now, it's trash. The other Rhodesian ruin being in the very centre of the city, next to the coal power station, the Bulawayo train station, which is one of the biggest stations in southern Africa and in all rights should be a hub of activity. But when visiting, it was completely abandoned. In the entrance hall, you will find old wooden ticket offices next to the signage pointing out where to get your COVID vaccine, the other side being the abandoned train timetable. The platform is unbelievably British in design and even has traditional painted-on Coca-Cola advertisements. That's the siren for stopping work. It's an air raid siren, but okay.
Yeah, that's best of all.
There were some carriages that should be used for freight and mail in operation, but when I noticed the passenger carriages in the back, I decided to jump on board, only to notice every single one was in a complete state of abandonment. They had not been stripped, but rather left to decay. Someone living in here? 1950, Metro Campbell, England. One nozzle for water. This is creepy. These carriages truly went back to ancient times in Rhodesia. One of them even had a wooden seating carriage for fourth-class passengers. And as we were filming, our guide, who was a policeman from the Bulawayo police force, who we'd hired to keep us safe, perked up and proudly said, as if boasting, that his father used to ride trains like these. Which is doubly sad, because that guy has kids, and his kids are definitely not going to be able to ride trains if this continues. When back in the Bulawayo club, a roadie managed to get a hold of the key to the club library. Average British man and his woman. And whilst in there, I found some old copies of the Rhodesian Railway magazine, which had images of what Bulawayo used to look like. Texan cigarettes, the best cigarettes around.
Texan, that goes back a long time. I used to smoke those.
Come and look at this. 1949. It's a comparison between the Salisbury and Bulawayo clubs on, if you spent 100 quid, how much would be spent on food? So in Salisbury it was 84%, here it was 96%. And we're complaining about this. But it was time to move on, and I wanted to see the Matopos Hills. And Matopos just means hills in Ndebele, apparently. And up here there are two great men who are buried. Mzilikatsi and Cecil Rhodes. First, Mzilikatsi, which means driving on dirt roads to get to him. Vote Zapu. Out here even the rocks vote for the big man. But before you arrive at the grave, there is a memorial built to Mzilikatsi, in honour of him and the Ndebele warriors, complete with Ndebele warrior symbolism, and noted at the end, erected by European subscription 1941. The Rhodesians built this monument to honour the African king. And every single year since then, Ndebele's come here, they build a wooden hut, eat around a campfire and recharge their spiritual energy. Because you see, Mzilikazi isn't just a king from the old times. Under local belief, he's also some kind of spiritual figure who's a king in the spirit world with the ancestors, and therefore is always watching over you. So when we arrived at the grave, it was protected by their custodians living in huts, along with their livestock and some dogs, including a traditional witch who contacts the spirits. Whilst we were waiting, she contacted the water spirits for some visiting Africans. After talking to the custodians, a direct descendant of Mzilikazi was permitted to show us the way to the grave, but being a woman, she had to stop at the last 100 meters and tell us the directions and couldn't come with us, which means she's spending her life as a custodian of her great ancestor's grave, and she's not allowed to see it. Okie dokie. We could, but that also meant taking off our shoes and socks and walking barefoot, which I was not a fan of, I'll be honest. When you get to the grave, it's a giant pile of rocks protected by a stone wall and iron bars. At the foot of the bars, Africans pour beer in honour of the king. We returned to interview the witch, and she placed the blame of the decline of the country on those leaving traditional beliefs and turning to Christianity. Okie dokie. She did say she was very appreciative of the European monument to Mzilikazi, but didn't know what was written on it because she can't read. And pretty soon we had to end the interview because the spirits had visited her.
So the spirits are now coming to Gogo now. So I asked her, she's saying, stop this one now.
Which was a good time to go and visit the Englishman Rhodes. And when you drive towards him, you'll actually get paved roads. And whilst getting up to the top of the hills, there is actually another monument to see, which is a monument to those who gave their lives in the Great Wars. The Moth Memorial, or Memorable Order of the Tin Hats, named after the tin hats that were issued to the soldiers in the First and Second World War. In the same way that the Matebele Monument had Matebele weapons on the front, the Moth Memorial has British rifles on the front. As you travel up the hills, you will also find cave paintings from 5,000 years ago left by Stone Age hunter-gatherers depicting themselves and the animals of this land. But as you reach the top, you will find where Cecil Rose instructed he should be entombed so that he could watch over his land. His grave is inscribed in stone and surrounded by giant boulders, and next to him was erected the Shangani Patrol Memorial with Alan Wilson and his men depicted. I did do some pieces to camera here, but the audio was completely unusable. But we did manage to run into the local police, who patrol this land for poachers. And our police sergeant even tried on my red coat. This place is called World's View, and if you go, it certainly is worth the view. But after a while, it was time to head back, where you will find a portrait of the dear leader, and some history about Rhodes. I handed the policeman a Freddo, which he seemed to be very happy with. Man, I'm out here solving Anglo-Zim relations and ending racism, and Cadbury still hasn't sponsored me. Cringe. And then we went out for a fancy dinner, which was Nando's, which I found out was a South African company. Basically, Zimbabwe doesn't have any Western-style fast food. They do have KFC, and that's pretty much it. When it comes to local fast food, Chicken Inn, Pizza Inn, and Creamy Inn. What more could you want? After that, I had to meet back up with Miles, because Miles actually wasn't with me in Bulawayo. Instead, well, he found out that there was a local town nearby that was being haunted by goblins, to the point that the police force of this town had actually abandoned the town because they were scared of the goblins. Now, this might sound strange to us, but in Zimbabwe, everyone I met believes in goblins and the powers they have, including the power to kill you. So Miles was off goblin hunting the whole time. And if you want to find the truth about the goblins, I'm sure he has it for you. I'll let you guess. You done guessing? Yeah, alright. Well, for us, it was time to head over to Harare, which was once called Salisbury.
가슴은 넓어지고
So we got on the road between Bulawayo and Harare, and this time the toll road, well, actually worked, and we had paved roads the whole time. But as we got close, we stopped off at a petrol station so our driver could take a piss, and me and Miles noticed more trains. Oh my god, train! Big train. Train. Train! Train! Like most autistic people, I have a love, even sexual, for trains. Dongxing machinery.
Glory to the CC pit! Oh no,
that's the wrong one. Now the plan was to drop Miles off at the Harare Club, which is the sister to the Bulawayo Club. So we thought it would be just as nice. And I was going to go and spend a night with some Rhodesians and then come and pick him up the next day. So after we dropped him off, we started driving, and we ran into some soldiers. The road we were going to take was now cornered off with armed military men and spikes. Naturally, they came up to us and asked us what we were doing, and our driver spoke to them in Shona, whilst I tried to tell the English directions to him, at which point the guards became angry that I wasn't speaking to them, even though I don't speak their language, and then started demanding what we were going to give them, at which point we said sorry and got the hell out of there and found a long way round. It turns out we were actually trying to drive down the road which has State House, which is where the president lives. Which I was told filming that was a big no-no, the biggest no-no you could commit. But I was then informed by our Rhodesian hosts that the Harare Club is not like the Bulawayo Club. It's more of the prostitute kind of hotel. And upon visiting Miles, I could see why. That's a good noise. Zimbabwean elevator. Do I really want to be in here? What's the view like?
Comes with spare batteries for the remote. Like I said, luxury.
So
and a view to rival the hotels of Paris. Get over curtains.
Wow, that's a wonderful view.
It is.
To be honest, you can see the Parliament of Zimbabwe. We drove past it. Apparently, if we take photos of that shit, the secret police are going to start following us, so don't ever do that.
I understand why. It's a highly esteemed organisation.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's like the Human Rights Bureau.
You know, they debate what the president has said, and then they say, good idea. Do you mind if I check the bathroom?
Yeah, of course. So the toilet came with skid marks. I think they're permanent on there. That wasn't me, trust me.
That's the advertisement.
Water doesn't get hot or cold. It's sometimes lukewarm. I've left it on for like 30 minutes when we came.
Yeah, that is just...
Yeah.
That's just weird. Don't tell me you drank any.
I may have gone desperate, okay? There's no bottled water here. I can't even walk 2 minutes. So I'd rather get water poisoning. Anyway. Nothing. Nothing. And yes.
Oh, it's cold.
Yes.
The hot tap gives you cold. Good. Let me guess, the cold tap also gives you cold.
Perhaps. Big if true. Let's see here.
Wait, what the fuck is this? Is that what your toilet paper's meant to go?
I think so, yes. I didn't even question that. I was like, it's just a cigarette.
You know when you're on the toilet and you have the brick, so you can play the brick.
Why not?
Ladies' powder room. Wait. Why are the female bathrooms so good? Like, look at this. What the hell?
Just occasionally 4 mirrors, plus another.
Little gold tops.
It's real gold, by the way.
Yeah, the toilets are not as good, but at least they have like little rooms where they can sit after shitting.
You know the new Zimbabwe currency that's backed by gold? It's actually on taps.
It's just the chair. It's the cup chair. Oh, they have a snooker room as well. But the handle is gone.
Yeah, they lost in the bet.
So we ended up staying with the Rhodesians for the rest of the trip, and these people are unbelievably wholesome and just the best. In fact, these people had been through losing everything twice. Once because they were farmers, so naturally that was taken from them. They're still holding on to the land deed in the hope to get their money back one day. And the second time was in 2008 when, well, everything was taken, and they had to join the bread lines, if there was bread. So they picked themselves up, dusted themselves down, and have now been able to bring themselves to a point in life where they can live in a gated community with some pretty posh shops nearby. However, this doesn't mean that roadies are insulated from life. They still wake up and have to deal with the fact that even though they've paid for their own solar panels to try and mitigate this, they regularly don't have hot water in the morning or electricity, And when you go to bed, you can smell smoke every night, because the locals don't have proper garbage collection, so are just burning their rubbish en masse, which means during the night, you're just smelling, well, everything being incinerated you could think of. Even in Zimbabwe. Fucking EU still gets to me. I thought Brexit meant Brexit! Not to mention, Americans rightly mock the British for having a TV license. Now in Zimbabwe, you've also got to get a radio license for your car's radio, which is $200 a year, which is quite a lot of money. So most sensible people in Zimbabwe get the radio and throw it out the car, and then you don't have to pay for it because you haven't got one. In fact, we were caught at one of the many checkpoints you'll find around the major city, and the police were checking for radio licenses. So when we pointed to the fact that there was no radio in the car, the policeman said, well, you should get a radio, and then you can pay the radio license. In fact, I was told a story that they used to carry around fixed speed guns, so then they could claim you were speeding and you had to pay a fine, even if you were doing like 2 miles an hour. Didn't matter, what are you going to do about it? Thankfully, the new president apparently then embedded members of the military with the police, and pretty soon this was cleared up. In fact, the road between Victoria Falls and Bulawayo used to have a load of random checkpoints, which would also generate a lot of revenue. And those are also gone. So there is progress. But these people were incredibly nice to us, so we made them bangers and mash, and Miles made them his, very famous brownies. I did also open up a cake that I brought in Bulawayo called Eco Cake, which cost a whole 5 zig, which is like 20 cents. The reviews were that it tasted like food. Anyway, the suburbs are not reality, of course, so we decided to venture out and see reality, which included many historic buildings, some of which look straight out of the Wild West, but the inhabitants are now your typical London residents with phone repair shops or vape shops. There was also an 80s-style concrete jungle building with a food court. The signs advertised Chinese food, Italian food, etc., but every single stand just sold Zimbabwean food. There was also a park known as Pioneer Park on Google Maps, which would have been a nice ruin to visit. But sadly, the area is now so bad, even our tour guide didn't want to be there, and was warning us that the place was for kidnappers. Once we got to the park entrance, we were told to leave because the military now used that land. So that was off the table. So I thought, screw it. I know where Zanu PF's headquarters is. That's kind of interesting. Let's go there and film that. And maybe go inside and say hello. To which the African driver looked at us like we were mental, pulled us over in a car park and said, okay, wait here. Went and got a friend of his, at which point we were allowed into Zanu PF's headquarters. So we went and brought some very nice berets and some very nice clothes, flags, etc., and then went and had lunch in the building, in the basement, which meant that we ended up buying lunch for our new guests, the security guys asking us questions, and our new party friend, and then random passers-by for some reason. And whilst we ate lunch, the security guys asked us who the hell we were and what we were doing here, being a bit suspicious, which is pretty normal. But upon finishing that, our new party friend said to us that we should head out and go and see the African Liberation Monument, or the Heroes' Ark as it's called. And the Heroes' Ark is a monument to Zanu and Zapu fighters who gave the country its independence under a black majority. There is a golden statue in the middle, which is of North Korean origin. Upon arrival, it was recommended that we should bow to it, the same way one does in Korea. And the side murals are incredibly Soviet. Murals like this tell a story, and the one here is that of oppressed Africans, oppressed by the Rhodesians, black and white, until the people were educated and armed themselves, fighting back, and eventually the dear leader Robert Mugabe led them into a bright new future. After this, we headed over to Chinatown for lunch, which is the first Chinatown without any Chinese people I've ever been to. Naturally, the sweet and sour has suffered a little bit. We did see Chinese flags in the countryside at coal power stations. Well, now there was a lot more Chinese investment, including a Chinese football stadium that was built nearby. And our man from the party was complaining about the difficulties of dealing with the Chinese and was hoping for more Western investment. The too long didn't read version is the proverb, if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well, doesn't seem to have made it to China yet. I'll put it that way. But after that, we dropped our party friend back off at the party headquarters, and after buying him lunch and Chinese food, he wanted us to buy him pizzas for his kids, so he could say that white men had brought them pizzas. We told him maybe next time, and with that we head back home, at which point we were given an anonymous tip-off that the security forces were now discussing us. So we thought we'd better lay low for the next few days, because it turns out you don't just walk into Zanu PF's headquarters. Nobody does that. So naturally it set off a few alarm bells about who the hell we were. And we quickly found out how true that was, because these berets, well, we thought they were kind of cool. We went down to town, and we're wearing a couple of them, and I get out of the car, and a guy looks at my skin tone and sees white guy and starts asking for money, and in the middle of asking for money, stops, looks up, and then just looks away and disappears. So I asked our driver, are these quite rare? And he said, yeah, whilst we're wearing these, nobody's going to bother us. Which was definitely true. As we started to walk to our location, definitely people seemed to be getting out the way of us. Even when we crossed the road, it seemed like traffic was stopping for us. That's power. So it was definitely time to keep a low profile. So I decided to head out and do some small touristy things, such as find the rocks on the Zig notes, hunted down some more cave paintings. This site is protected by the National Museums and Monuments Act, Cap 131. Treat it with respect. Not so much. Technically, you could argue this is adding to the art. I mean, in 10,000 years, this will be the same thing. An endless list of names and who's fucking who is probably not as interesting. So they're not using cones here. They're using rocks. People will steal the cones.
They steal them or they damage them.
And lastly, went to the Monomatapa Hotel. Because I kept getting told the same story from the roadies who are still in country, which is that some guys who were on patrol came back, decided to go out and have drinks with the lads, and one of them wanted to show off how manly he was. So pulled out a revolver, put one bullet in, spun it, and said, guys, let's play Russian roulette. Everyone else thought he was a fucking idiot, and just said no. So to show off how easy, I guess it was, and how you play it, he put the revolver in his mouth, pulled the trigger, and blew his brains all over the Monomatapa bar. Which is pretty dumb. So I went to the Monomatapa Hotel to ask about this story, and sadly the African staff who were there didn't seem to know anything about it. I don't know if it's because they're not old enough to remember that time, but if it's a rumour, it's a good rumour. But the last thing I wanted to do was go and see how the best and worst live in society. Because if you check the travel advice for Zimbabwe, you'll notice that there's a warning for cholera. Never mind polio. So I asked to be taken to a place called Mbare. I was told Mbare was designated as a black district in Rhodesia by the Rhodesian government, and they built some apartment blocks to try and house the Africans. But after independence, Mugabe needed more support in the cities, so more Africans were brought into the cities and placed in Mbare. The result was the place is now overcrowded, full of trash, the roads mix with sewage, and people survive selling from shacks. I was also told to survive here it was practically mandatory to support Zanu PF, and doing otherwise was really not a good idea. Say no to drugs, and say yes to music. Good advice. You might think the roadies, the ones living the incredibly rich lifestyle, but no. If you want to go and see the actual rich people, you can, but filming was not advised of their big houses. We do, however, have Google Street View, so I can show off at least two examples. The first being Grace Mugabe's house, or at least one of them, whose walls are so tall that when you're there, you can't even see the roof of the mansion. It seems, in this country, hiding your wealth is kind of mandatory, and as my friend put it, they like to decorate the outsides of their places with various different things, such as barbed wire, razor wire, pieces of glass just sticking up out of the wall, electric fencing, and various other decorations. But there is one more place that stood out like a sore thumb, which has got to be the biggest mansion I saw in the entire country. Probably in my life as well, which is the Prophet. There's a guy in Zimbabwe who claims to be a prophet, and has done quite well for himself, because he has this huge place, which I was told some guys who worked there, he doesn't have a fridge. The dude has a cold room. He has an entire room just dedicated to being cold, so it can house the stuff that you'd put in a fridge. That wasn't even the weirdest thing, though. When we were driving past, there was a guy stood out the front in all black who was armed and staring at us. And when you got your own mercenaries to protect your house, you're doing all right. So the last thing I did in country was go and find the last antique dealer that seemingly exists and buy quite a few Rhodesian things from the old days. And then it was time to fly out. But I wasn't done with Africa. In fact, I was going to South Africa next, because I wanted to meet up with an old Rhodesian rock star, John Edmund, and ask him about how life used to be. John makes all kinds of music, but his folk music about Rhodesia has seen a massive resurgence online for people interested in Rhodesia, because online world, that's how it goes. So I thought I'd go and ask him a few questions. So I arrived in South Africa, met up with an Afrikaans friend, and now we're heading to see John Edmund. And I promised I'd wear the red coat for him, so here we are.
I was born in Luanshya, in the Roan Antelope Mine Hospital, and I grew up there. And then my parents moved to Scotland for a couple of years. We went to Edinburgh, and I went to school in Edinburgh for 2 years. And when she was better, we returned back to northern Rhodesia. So when my boarding school days started, they put us on a train. It used to take 4 days from Ndola down to Johannesburg or wherever the school, or Pretoria, wherever the school was. And then I returned back to Rhodesia. And of course, then I was eligible for call-up. And I was called up to the Rhodesian Army, and I spent 6 years in the territorial Rhodesia Regiment. 11 Platoon C Company, Bulawayo, 1956, 1957. And that's me there. That hell of a good-looking bloke there, the best-looking guy. And we served in many sort of conflicts there, a lot of riots, border patrols on the Congo. I was stationed on the Congo border. When the Congo blew up, we rescued a lot of refugees coming over from the Belgian Congo. And of course, we were expecting possibly an invasion by the Force Publique, who were the rebels in the Congo that took over, and maybe we thought they would get clever and try and take Northern Rhodesia, which they didn't. After I'd been in the operational area, they'd inspired me to write those troopy songs because they made deep impressions on me, all the different facets, the funny parts, the tragic parts, and that's where troopy songs actually were born, out of true life experiences, and they're probably the songs that will go on forever, because they play troopy songs. I get letters from Croatia, Israel, soldiers from Israel, soldiers from all over the world. It doesn't matter who the enemy is, but I think being a soldier, you've got the same hardships. You still got to polish your uniform, or, clean your rifle, or go into a skirmish. So it doesn't matter which army you're in. So for some reason, the troopy songs have lived on, and I'm very chuffed about that.
Would you be allowed to go back and visit Zimbabwe because you're so famous from the troopy songs and such? Would that be a problem politically?
Yeah, no, not a problem. As a matter of fact, I did a couple of, shall we say, covert tours to Rhodesia, to Zimbabwe, and I played in farmers' halls. I played in secret places. And a lot of the waiters were given the night off. And I played at a place called Kwekwe one night. And all the waiters had gotten the night off. And one of the songs that I always used to sing was Sweet Banana. And it's in Shona and it's in Ndebele as well. There's a verse in Shona and one in Ndebele and one in English. And I started singing the song, and suddenly out of the woodwork came these black guys. They didn't want to have the night off. They were ex-waiters. They came and they joined in and they sang Sweet Banana with me, and it was so rewarding. And there was no bad feeling at all there, not at all. I played in a place called isigodini. And right next door was a shebeen, a beer hall, where they play loud music. And the next building was the police station. So I said to the organizer, listen, I'm a bit scared to sing troopy songs here. They said, no, the police will never hear it because there's a shebeen in between. So you just play what you like. So I played all the troopy songs at isigodini in their little town hall. It was a wonderful, wonderful evening.
I will be releasing the full thing soon enough as a separate video, but there is one more thing I wanted to see in South Africa. After Rhodesia fell and became Zimbabwe, a lot of people in South Africa were quite worried that they might go through a similar thing, because ethnic separation continued right up to the 1990s. South Africa then focused on more of a reconciliation narrative, but most international observers can tell that South Africa has definitely declined. And as a result, people are now trying to, as they put it, state-proof their life. So I met up with an Afrikaans friend in South Africa, who then took me to the Voortrekker Monument. As mentioned, the Afrikaans are the descendants of the Dutch, and the Voortrekker Monument is a monument to the massive trek they had to make across the country to get away from the British. And inside it is truly monumental, with a mural telling their entire story, and even the battles they had along the way, including getting massacred by the Zulus. And since South Africa had been declining, apparently so has their politics. My friend quoted a statement which is that in a multicultural society, elections are not a representation of people's politics, but instead a head count of different ethnic groups. And that seems to be the case of what's happened in South Africa. Meanwhile, safety has collapsed and security has been reduced to road signs warning you that you have entered an area of carjackings. If you have no power, well, that's no surprise. KFC even has advertisements that they have backup power. Even water doesn't always work here, which leaves you with the question, what's the point in the state if it can't even provide the most basic of services? Which has left communities fending for themselves. And the Afrikaners seem to be the group most able, or in a position most able, to fill in that gap for themselves. My friend is from a group called AfriForum, which are a civil rights and community organising arm of the Afrikaner Christian Trade Union Solidarity. Basically, Solidarity realised that the state institutions were going to collapse and decided to build their own to protect their communities of Afrikaners, which now means they have somewhat of the ability to provide their own power, water, neighbourhood watches for security, media, legal defences, and have also set up their own technical college to train artisans. The college's only language is Afrikaans, and gets no funding from the state, so has none of the nonsense of Western colleges. Instead, I saw mechanics, metalwork, robotics, and electronics. The level of state-proofing is exactly the kind of thing Westerners sometimes dream about, but here in South Africa, the Afrikaans just unified, got crowdfunded by their community, and started building it. This isn't to say that South Africa isn't a fucked up place. It certainly is. I mean, even in Zimbabwe, we didn't have to deal with bandits on the highways, who just carjack you and kill you. So there's that, but it does mean these people now have some defense in a network of institutions in case the government tries to come for their land. In fact, it's probably because the Afrikaners recognise for them, there's nowhere they can flee to. They can't go back to the Netherlands. They're just not the same as the Dutch anymore. They're Afrikaners and their home is in Africa. As for Zimbabwe, well, I certainly recommend a visit, especially if you want to see ruins of the British Empire. As for the people of Zimbabwe, well, to be honest, they're kind of amazing. I mean, everyone we met had multiple trades, because you need that. I mean, if one of your trades falls through, you need to be able to find something else to find food, essentially, through work. Everyone who you see begging on the street, well, they're not really begging, they're selling something, which means they're all entrepreneurs trying to get by. The people who just, well, are waiting for someone else to feed them, well, they starve. But sometimes reminiscing about the past isn't nostalgia, especially when there's video evidence of that past being better than now. I just hope one day that Zimbabwe can eclipse it for the average person. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this, and, well, if you'd like to see more, go over to Subscribestar and help fund it. Otherwise, liking and subscribing does definitely help, and please do it. And I still do read every single comment. Thank you, and goodbye.